Current Events in the Blinded World, Part 17. You know, instead of doing a usual Bible study like I do with these current events, I think I'm just going to do a commentary this time and just talk about the things that are going on in the world. Because there's quite a lot going on. Today we saw the leaders of the world get together and march in France because of the activities that have been going on there. Now, I'm not going to judge what's going on over there as to whether it's real or not, because there are so many conspiracies out there. And one of the bad things about conspiracy theories is that when you have so many conspiracy theories of this or that or the other, then you're never really going to get to the truth, because there's always going to be those that believe this part of the conspiracy or that part of a conspiracy or whatever else. And some of them are quite far-fetched and quite crazy. Others of them seem to fall in line with common sense. But none of us can really know. We can't know whether it's part of a bigger agenda. I mean, I'm sure it's part of some bigger agenda, but what part of the agenda it is, I'm unsure. But we saw all the world leaders today walking down the streets of France, calling for peace, calling for an end against terrorism. And it kind of put me in mind of when they shall yell, or when they shall cry peace and safety, then come a sudden destruction. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening, but, you know, I've seen it posted a number of times, a number of places today on the internet, that world leaders come together for peace, or world leaders come together to speak against terrorism. And most people find that as a heartwarming thing, and, oh, you know, what a wonderful thing, and maybe it is. I don't know. But I'll tell you what it very much looks like to me. It looks like to me that a bunch of people came together for the first time ever. I mean, this is unprecedented that this happened. And they all came together and marched for unity, which is what we know one world government is really all about. I mean, besides its obvious other agendas. But all these people marched together, and like I said, it might be a good thing, it might not. There's no way for us to really know what's on the minds of the people doing it. You know, whether it's done for the cameras, for show, whether they really care, it really doesn't matter. We know that the world is headed towards one world government. There's just no getting around that. And all of this happened in France. Well, where are the eyes of the world currently focused? France. So, you know, it's a little bit convenient that these things would be happening in France. So you'll just have to judge for yourself. I'm not going to tell you which way to choose. You know, there's no telling whether these things are real, whether they're false flags, whether the terrorism is real. I mean, obviously the events unfolding are real. People are dying, people are being killed, but who's really at the core of it? Is it really Islamic terrorists? Very possibly. Could it be that there's a bigger agenda? Also very possible. And there are going to be conspiracy theories about it, like there have been about everything from the Oklahoma City bombing to 9/11 to whatever, whichever thing you want to talk about. There's always a conspiracy theory. I am not one who is really that hepped up on conspiracy theories because, as I said, when you get everything to become a conspiracy theory, then you can never get to the truth. And I think this is part of misinformation and disinformation being dished out to us by the media, by the higher elite echelon. In other words, the same old, self-same sons of Cain, which you can call them what you will, Bilderbergers, Illuminati, whatever you feel comfortable calling them. It's still the self-same sons of Cain, controlling world events. But it's also crazy that this is happening now, and it's also unprecedented. And speaking of this march, there was one member of the world community who was not there. A member of the world community who has been pushing world community, yet he didn't feel it was important enough to show up at this march, and I'm speaking, of course, of the President of the United States. However, he did send our controversial head lawyer over there, Eric Holder, but he was not to be seen at the march. And really, that's no surprise. Our president never takes a stand on anything, unless, of course, it's a socialist agenda. And every time anything is said against him, or the Congress and the Senate get together and agree to go against him, he threatens to bring out the veto pen. Well, that's not what the veto pen was designed for. Once you get to that state, you do not really have a government by the people and for the people anymore. You've got a dictatorship. In other words, to completely bypass the Congress and the Senate is a dictatorial move. Not that some of the things that the Congress and the Senate do should not be bypassed, or should not have been bypassed in past events, that is to say. But they won't address those issues. Oh no, too controversial. But something like this, yeah, they'll all come together on it. They'll all agree with it. But we now have a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, with a Democratic president. And in 2016, if an election is allowed to occur, and we get a Republican president, and then we have all three branches of government under the Republicans, you see if anything changes for the better. I'm just about going to guarantee you, in fact, I'll go even farther than that, I will guarantee you, that all their big promises, all their big words, all the wonderful speeches they make about what we should do, about what we need to do, no action will be taken on it. They will not reverse Obamacare. They will not overturn abortion. They will not change the status quo of gay marriage that's going on in the country now, where everyone's falling into line with that politically correct attitude. They're going to stay away from it. Why? Because they want to be reelected, or they want to retire with their big pensions. In other words, they're scared. It's just like I've said many times in many Bible studies. In the end times, your leaders shall be children. Children shall be their oppressors. Well, in actuality, that means men with the minds of children. Children afraid to act. Children afraid to stand up for what's right. And of course, that's the way it's got to be for the world government to come in. But what good are they doing? I mean, really, what good are they doing? Everybody was so glad when the Republicans got into office, but the Republicans now are not like conservatives of old. There are a few that are. but very few. Moreover, what you've got is a big fraternity in the Democrats and the Republicans of people that came out of the same colleges, people that were put into power by the same people, and they have a consensus. I mean, the Democrats have moved farther and farther to the left. They've become the neo-progressive socialists of the world, or of the country. And what have the Republicans become? Well, they've become what the Democrats were only a few years ago. Now the right wing has become the left wing, because they have moved left of center. They're bargaining and selling with the politically correct money of, well, how am I going to word this? They're bargaining away our future. How do we know this? Look at all the things that money are being spent on now, which make absolutely no sense. I mean, we've got people in office, from the president on down to the senators and the Republicans of the United States, that claim that they care about the people. All of them claim to care about the people. We're concerned about the American citizen. We're concerned about lowering taxes and making the burden easier and giving people cheaper health care. Only what has been the result? The exact opposite. And no one calls them on it. The media sure is not going to call them on it. And apparently very few Americans call them on it. You know, when this president was campaigning in his first campaign before he even became president, he declared that he was going to cut the budget of the United States in half in his first term. Is the budget cut in half? Is it cut by 1/3? Let me put it to you this way. Is it cut by one damn red penny? The answer is no to all three. As a matter of fact, we are now at $18 trillion in debt. So nothing has been cut. And what are we doing? Well, we're funding things like NASA. What are we funding NASA for? Well, we're sending them out to send spacecrafts into space to planets like Mars to look for life, or signs of life, or that there had ever been oceans or water there. And in my mind, what the hell difference does it make? There is no life there, and they're not going to find life there. And we just sent a comet up, or excuse me, not a comet, we just sent a satellite up that took a while to reach a comet and land on it, and send back photos of the comet. Nice black and white photos of a big chunk of ice floating through space. And it only cost us, billions of dollars. And what for? To search for the building blocks of life. In other words, that is an admittance by NASA and by the government who funds NASA. In other words, the taxpayer being charged and given the bill for NASA to send up these things. And it is an admission by the government and by the people of NASA, the scientists, that they don't believe in God. They're still looking for the origins of life in the universe. And these are the people that are over you. People that go to church when it's convenient. People that get sworn in on Bibles. People that claim to stand up for the American people. Yet we have homeless veterans laying in the streets, while prisoners are put into jail in air-conditioned cells. They're given 3 square meals a day. They are provided with weight rooms and places to exercise. They're allowed to go out and run track. They're given libraries. Many of them pursue becoming a lawyer in jail. Others use the internet, which, you know, prisons with internet. Isn't that interesting? A lot of them are even given conjugal visits, you know, where they're not even denied the pleasures of women. Yet our homeless veterans lay out in the streets with post-traumatic stress disorder, or they dwell in tent cities. People who have gone out and fought for this nation, shed blood for this nation, and they lay there shivering at night in the cold, while the prisoners lay up in heated comfort. These people, the veterans, don't even have a place to go to the bathroom. But the people in jail do. You know, you got to stop and ask yourself, what's fair about that? What's right about that? What's right about taking money from people that have earned it? In other words, when they signed up for the military, they were supposed to get a pension from the military when they got out. But the pensions have been cut, and likewise with Social Security, which incidentally was supposed to never be touched, so that people can't make it. And then we've got the Affordable Care Act, in other words, universal health care, Obamacare, where, excuse me, where you go and you buy insurance through Obamacare. And it's not nearly as affordable as they claimed it was going to be. As a matter of fact, many people cannot even afford it. And what does that do to the other insurance companies? Well, it causes them to have to raise their rates. What is this accomplishing? Well, it's making no gain whatsoever. People are still without insurance because they can't afford it either through Obamacare or through their regular provider, which they had. I know personally that this is the truth because I've watched my premiums go up and up and up, and I've had to take measures to be able to keep on affording it. But what if you don't have insurance? Well, then the Internal Revenue Service is coming after you. I watched a report the other night that this year the fine would be $230 per person who did not have insurance. Next year, the fine will be $480. The following year, it will be $1,100. So in essence, most of us now, if we're lucky, are paying about $1,100 to $1,500 a year to have insurance. Now, what about these people who can't afford health care? Well, they're going to be forced to pay $1,100 to $1,500 anyway and still get no health care. Why? Because the IRS will come after them if they don't. You know, how blind does America have to be to allow these things to go on and to say nothing? This gets more and more ridiculous by the day. When you hear it, you can barely believe it. You can barely believe that this is actually going on and that people are asleep at the wheel and not even noticing. Oh, they'll whine and complain about it, but what are they going to do about it? Well, they're not going to do anything about it. That's what they're going to do. This is a method of them taking control. They're going to make life so expensive till it's unaffordable for you to live. And the debt's going to keep going up, and they're going to keep raising the debt ceiling and using things like quantitative easing. But brother, gas prices have fallen so much lately. Yeah, they have. But wait till next year and the year after that. They're going to skyrocket. They're getting people used to paying $2 a gallon for gas. You know, we haven't seen those kind of prices in a few years. But watch what happens in a few years, or next year, or maybe even this year. Gas prices are going to shoot way back up. Nothing that our government is doing makes common sense for what they say with their mouths. In other words, food prices keep going up. They want to raise the minimum wage, okay? What happens if they raise the minimum wage? Well, everybody's going to be able to make a living then. Yeah, bullshit. Excuse my language, but bullshit. If you raise the minimum wage, people are going to make more money, yes. But you know what's going to happen when people make more money? Then the people that have to pay them more money are going to charge more money. In other words, all the big businesses, all the companies in America are going to charge the consumer more. There has never been one minimum wage thus far that has not caused an increase in the prices of food and goods. And for every minimum wage that there has ever been, the price of foods and the price of goods has increased exponentially and still gets out of hand to where people cannot afford it. So what is it really? It is a feel-good action. We did something. We accomplished something. We raised the minimum wage. Well, congratulations. In doing so, you've now made the companies that have to pay the higher minimum wage increase their prices. Well, that's just because they're greedy. No, it's because they're in business to make money. You know, the basis of forming any business is to make money. It's to make a living. And yes, there are those cases where people abuse that and pay themselves way too much. But then again, look at the charities in the country. Salvation Army, Goodwill, the United Way, and many others. Look what their heads are paid. You know, these are supposed to be charities, and their heads are making $450,000 a year, or $176,000 a year, or $240,000 a year. That doesn't seem too charitable to me. But nobody takes notice of it. Even when it's reported, even when it shows up on social media, people say, well, that's just BS. They'll believe every other thing that shows up on social media, but when the truth shows up, oh, that's BS. It's a rumor, it's a hoax. Reach into your wallet and see how much money you got, friend. And the next time you go to buy your groceries, see how much it cost you. The next time you go out to eat, see how much it cost you. And remember 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, and 15 years ago, and 20 years ago. I'll tell you, you could go into a fast food restaurant of your choice. You know, any of the big names, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, whatever. And you could take $2 with you. 2 Federal Reserve notes. And you could buy a hamburger, French fries, and a Coca-Cola. And sometimes even get a dessert like an apple or a cherry pie. $2 would do that for you. In some cases, you still can when they throw them on sale. But only when they're on sale. Look at the price of an average hamburger now. You know, my granddad, years ago, I remember he embarrassed the entire family one time at a restaurant because we went in there and they wanted 50 cents for a hamburger. And he got mad, he walked on a cane, and he took his cane and slapped it on the counter and said that they were robbing people for charging 50 cents for a hamburger. Well, I guess he'd be rolling over in his grave now. Have you checked out the price of a real hamburger these days? I'm not talking about just a little tiny, tiny burger, one of their special little tiny burgers. I'm talking about a full-size burger. You know, call it a Big Mac, call it a Whopper, call it a Wendy's Hot and Juicy. The average price is about $4.50, and if you get anything specialty on it, it's going to run you about $6 or $7. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous for a piece of bread with a little lettuce, a squirt of ketchup, a squirt of mustard, and a few onions, pickles, or a little bit of whatever on there to cost that much. But people pay it and think nothing of paying it. You used to could go out to a restaurant, a nice fine dining restaurant, and spend $20 and feed your whole family. Try doing that now. You'll pay $50 or $60, and then you'll be forced to give a gratuity. In other words, now a gratuity, a tip, in other words, is no longer your choice. Which, you know, people should always tip unless they get bad service. But now it's no longer your choice. It's added on to the bill. A lot of people find it on their credit cards. No longer your choice now. You know, I remember when you could sit down at a table and eat, and, you know, if the waiter or waitress did a good job, you could leave them a $5 tip. And we're talking years ago. You know, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but, you know, you could leave them a $5 tip, and, you know, if they did a good job all night long and got a bunch of $5 tips, you know, they made pretty good money. They made less than minimum wage, but they made pretty good money. I know because I worked in the restaurant industry at one point. But what is it now? Well, now you've got to pay a certain amount. And it's added on for you. Now, this is not the case at every single restaurant. There still are some that allow you to pay what you will. You know, you can take out cash and lay whatever you feel like is right down on the table. The average is 10 to 15% of the meal cost. And then, let's jump to another subject here. I wanted to put a new door on my house because the other one had, I had a metal door up, developed a little rust on it, and a door these days will cost you about $150, $160 to replace. Depending on whether you get a wood door or metal door, the price may vary according to your state, according to the store you buy it at, or whether you buy it secondhand. Some people do refurbish them, but the average cost was about $150, $160, something like that. Do you know what a permit from your city costs to put the door up? It'll cost more than the door does. $179 to put up a door, to get a permit to put a door on your own house. Now, that's if you have it done professionally. If you put the door up yourself, you can get away with it. Maybe. But it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. It is extorting money from the people, is all it amounts to. It's just like many things that are done now in the states of the United States of America that they charge you for. You know, I've raised Cain about this before. You used to could get a driver's license, a regular, normal driver's license. And that would entitle you to drive a car or a small truck. In other words, a pickup or a gas job, which is what we call it. That means a gas engine truck. Or a motorcycle. And all you had to have was a regular driver's license. Not now. Now you've got to go take a 3-day course if you want to ride a motorcycle, which each day costs you, and then you've got to take about a 300 question test, which costs you money. In the end, you have the cost of the license, which is probably about $72. But to get the license, you have to dish out about $369. Well, that's just a safety course, brother, and they need to do that. Yeah. You know, I was thinking about that one day as a bunch of idiots went past me on one wheel. In other words, 3 or 4 guys on motorcycles, on crotch rockets, you know the kinds of bikes I'm talking about, went past me in my truck, and all of them were wheeling on one wheel. And all of them went and passed that safety course. All of them went and were extorted that money from them so that they would know how to drive safely. Yet they're riding down the highway at 80, 100 miles an hour on one wheel. So really, what does it come down to? Again, feel-good politics and a way to extort money from the people. It's crazy what is going on in this country and what money is being spent and on what, and people say nothing of it. You know, we're not allowed to use our own natural resources that we have in this country because they're on protected federal land, which the federal government went and bought years ago. Well, why does that piece of land need to be preserved rather than other pieces of land which they could have bought which did not have oil on them or coal? I mean, are people really that blind that they don't know what the agenda was in the first place? To buy up the land with the oil, with the coal on it, so that the government could control it and keep us dependent on Saudi Arabian oil or oils from countries that claim to hate us and call us the Great Satan? Do you not see how that's working to make us go into one world government? And now there's talk of a new Cold War between Russia and America. Well, in my mind, the Cold War never ended. They just called it by a different name. It's still what it was before. Underneath the veneer of democracy in Russia, communism is still boiling. And now they have tried to form their own bank, if you will, in what they call BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China. And China is supporting now the Russians and these other countries. And why is China doing that? Well, because they're filled with money. And you know where they got the money from? Take one guess. I'll tell you how you can tell. Walk into any Walmart. Walk into any... I'll do you one better than that. Walk into any store USA. Any store USA. And pick up something and see where it was made. Because I guarantee you, you're going to see one of 3 or 4 things. You're going to see Heco in Mexico. In other words, made in Mexico, or you're going to see made in China, or made in Taiwan, or made in Singapore. You don't even see made in Japan that much anymore like you used to. On a few odd occasions you will. But you know what the least thing you'll ever see is? Made in America. You know, I went in one day. It was getting near July 4th, and I went in and picked up an American flag. And I could not believe that in the United States of America, we have to import American flags made in China. Is that not ridiculous or what? But people don't take time to notice these things. Just like they're asleep at the wheel on many things. They'll go in and fill up a basket, and they'll buy the cheapest things that they can to get by, often made in China. not really realizing that they were empowering a big store to eat up the mom and pop stores in their own cities, towns, counties, and not really caring because money's more important to them. So the mom and pop stores close, and little tiny businesses don't stand a chance against big businesses because they can't be in competition with them. The big businesses can buy in bulk and sell for cheaper. And they can buy in China and get it for even cheaper than that. From American companies who have moved on to China. Why did they move on to China? Well, because they're greedy. Well, perhaps. Either that or the taxation here in America and the tariff and the fines and levies that they had to face because of emissions that they might put out into the atmosphere against, global warming and other such, let's see, what was that word I used earlier? Bullshit? Yeah, that. They can't afford to pay. So what do? They go to other countries. And what do the media and the liberals do? They attack them. They say, those greedy bastards, they left this country and put millions of Americans out of work. Yeah, they did. But who forced them to leave the country? Liberals, progressives. Who did it? It was you, with the help of your Republican cronies. The same ones that get up there and stand and say, we are for the American people. We want to make equal footing for everyone. That's why we spend so much on welfare. The people that really need the welfare don't get it. The people that really need Medicare and Medicaid have to fight for it and go to court to get it. But others do not, based on their voting demographic of being poor or whether they're a certain race. What's right about that? Well, it's just getting back at people for things that happened in America's past. Which brings me to my next point. All the quote-unquote media-friendly, easy-to-swallow, palatable word, unrest in the country. Which is being done by people who are called reverends, such as the good Al Sharpton. I mean, he's not a racist or anything, right? And Jesse Jackson. These are people that openly show that they are racists. The words they speak show that they are racists. The things that they do prove that they are racists. But no one will call them racists except for a few brave people on conservative talk radio, one or two news channels, a few blogs on the internet, and people like myself. Why? Because it's not politically correct to say anything to a person of color. Not even if they're doing things which are clearly racially motivated. Whether they're inciting a riot, or whether they're trying to anger people with a bunch of mislaid facts and misinformation and disinformation. We've even got sensitivity training courses now for police officers called Shoot or Don't Shoot. You know what's going to happen? A lot more cops are going to end up dead. Because they're going to hesitate at the moment that they need to pull the trigger for fear of killing a person who might be of a different race than them. And they're going to die. And they're going to leave behind their children and their families. Instead of doing what they should do and blowing away the criminal bastards. And I'm sorry that I'm using this language that I am, but you know what? I've had enough of this. I know that we're going into one world government. I know we're going into captivity. I know that all these things must come to pass, but that doesn't mean I have to like it, and it doesn't mean I can't speak my mind about it. And perhaps I should use easier language for some of the younger people that might be listening to this, but, you know, they see worse than what I'm saying on TV, and their parents don't even care. They hear worse in video games than what I'm saying, and their parents don't care. And I'm not saying every parent. There are those that do care, but the majority of people don't. When you've got parents that allow their children to grow up to be criminals, and the criminal gets shot dead in the street for attacking a police officer or whatever reason, and then the parents want to sue because they feel they've been wronged, you know, who really did the wrong? Who did not discipline the child or teach him not to go in and rob a store or not to beat on somebody? Who's really at fault here? Well, it doesn't matter as long as their pockets get lined with money and the lawyers that support them make a lot of money. They don't care. It's all a matter of perspective. You know, I used to say there was no such thing as the truth being cut and dry or black and white, but that's not exactly true anymore. Now the truth is black and white, according to what race you are. And we've got millions of illegals flowing into the country still. Even years after the border fence, you know, and who was that? Dianne Feinstein or somebody that said, the border is more safe than it's ever been and more protected. Who do you think you're fooling? 20 million extra illegals in the country now, which represent progressive liberal votes, and you want me to believe that the border's secure? And all these laws being signed in by the pen of the president, where we're not enforcing the laws of the country anymore? The laws. You do understand what a law is, right? Well, let's say you break the law and you don't pay your taxes. How long do you think you're going to stay out of jail? Well, you might stay out of jail. You might get away with it for a few years. If you do, you'll be assigned a big fine. And if you don't pay it, you will end up doing jail time. But illegals can come into this country and they can get welfare. They can get WIC. They can get SNAP. They can get free cell phones. They can get HUD homes. They can vote. They can get driver's licenses. They can work without paying taxes. But you, Mr. and Mrs. America, and I don't care if you are of Mexican heritage or African American heritage or Scotch-Irish heritage or Italian heritage, all of those of you who do abide by the law and pay your taxes are subsidizing them to get away with breaking the law. And you're feeding and housing them. And helping them to make more of their people. Which there's nothing wrong with childbirth. Don't take my words out of context. But why are we supposed to subsidize it? You know, I saw a graph the other day. Speaking of graphs and demographics, I saw a graph the other day that said, and I'm not sure how accurate it was. I didn't go in and research it and go into it in great detail, but it came from a fairly accurate site that I've trusted before, and that are mostly in tune with what's going on in the world. And report things from the correct point of view. This graph showed that of Americans, about 600,000 people a year are murdered in the United States. I think it was 686,000. They did not list how much of that was black on black crime, white on white crime, white on black crime, black on white crime, or Latino on black, Latino on white. None of that. Asian, none of it. None of that was listed. And then they showed how many people were killed by heart attacks. I don't remember what the number of that was, but it was something on the order of 200,000. Then they showed how many people were killed by cancer, which was slightly higher. Then they showed how many children were killed every year by abortion. And do you know that 1.6 million children are aborted every year? Now, whether that number is exactly correct, again, I cannot vouch for. I have not done the research on it. But I trust the site well enough to say that they're close if they're not exact. So, what is the crux of what I'm saying? The unborn have no voice. They're murdered with no problem at all, and nobody goes out and holds up signs very much. I mean, there are some Christian groups that do, obviously. But you let a serial killer or someone who has done wanton murder be facing the death penalty, and go stand at the jail that night and watch what happens. You're going to see Christians out there holding up candles and singing hymns, holding up signs saying, the Bible says it's wrong to kill, because they're too blithering, bleeding ignorant to go and look up in Hebrew what the commandment actually says. It says, thou shalt do no murder. It does not say, thou shalt not kill. And you know, God was even so kind to us in the Bible, for those who read it and don't just go and sit in church and believe every little thing you're told by the little pastor. God was so kind of us to tell us what to do with a murderer. In other words, someone who committed murder. And what did God say to do with a murderer? He said, hand them over to the shedder of blood, that they may be put to death and sent back to me. In other words, to God. That they may be sent back to God to await judgment. But is that what happens? No. No, you got groups of Christians out there that are going to stand there and yell, you're doing wrong by putting that person to death. And then you've got the other sect of Christians, or maybe the same sect, I don't know, that will go to an American soldier's funeral and celebrate the soldier's death and claim that he got what he deserved. You know, I know many of you have heard of the particular church I'm not talking about, but, you know, they go to soldiers' funerals who went off to serve this country and caused their families even more grief than they've already have by the loss of their son or daughter. And, you know, for doing so, they ought to be lined up against the wall and put out of their misery for being that stupid. Well, now you're judging. Well, perhaps so. And maybe I shouldn't say things like that. But then again, if you are that stupid that you would go to an American soldier's funeral and protest and cause the family who is there to grieve and bury their child more grief, then you are too stupid to breathe. You've probably got to have a sign tied to your hand that says, breathe, stupid, breathe. And remember to keep breathing. And these same ones will get out and hold up signs that say, God hates homosexuals. God hates fags. Well, I will agree that God does not find the lifestyle savory. Matter of fact, he called it an abomination, which means it's filth to him. But he does not hate the person. He would rather that the person come to him and come to the truth and come out of that lifestyle. But you've got as many different opinions about that as you do about everything. Whatever you've got an opinion about, everybody's got an opinion on it. I don't care what it is. Whether it's something controversial or whether it's a tiny little thing that you said in a Bible study. You know, I will get people writing me, telling me things in Bible studies, which we both agree on the same things. You know, they agree with me that there's not going to be a rapture, that the Antichrist is coming first, but because I didn't say a thing a certain way that was pleasing to their ear, they're going to split hairs right down the middle. And they're going to start an argument with me. Or a debate. I don't do that. I don't go to anyone else's site. You won't ever see me go to another site on any of the channels that I'm on, GodTube, YouTube, or Vimeo, and comment on someone else's thing, even if it's something that I wholeheartedly don't believe. You won't see me go there and put my 2 cents in on what they're teaching. Because first of all, argument never leads to anything. You're only going to drive a deeper wedge between you and the person. You're not going to gain any ground. Now, there are other people that will write me and debate respectfully. And if they do that, that's one thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a respectful, civil debate amongst Christian brothers to try to seek out the truth together. But then you've got those that go on there and say, you're going to burn in hell. You're teaching lies. You're a false teacher. You're an evil person. You don't know what you're talking about. And what really gets at me the most is when they'll take an English verse from the Bible and try to use it. And I know full well what the verse says in Hebrew or Greek. And I realize that even in saying what they said to me, that they have done no study other than reading the Bible in English or going and sitting in a church and believing whatever their good pastor or their good preacher or their good priest told them. And yet they're going to presuppose to correct me. Which is not to say that I'm perfect. There have been people who have corrected me and been very successful in doing so because they made points and caught me in mistakes. Even so, I leave those lectures up. And a lot of the times I will write them back and say, hey, good eye. You know, you're right. You found that, and you're absolutely right. I said the wrong thing there. And that's one reason I don't take those lectures down. I could easily take the lecture down and replace it with the correct word or the correct phrase or the correct Bible number or the correct book. In other words, sometimes I'll say Isaiah when I mean Ezekiel, or I'll say Jeremiah when I mean Daniel. You know, I'm a human being. But I don't. I'll leave those things up for people to see. And if they catch it, good. If they don't catch it, well, you know, then they really have not either noticed or are not that in tune with the book till it really makes a difference, or they just let it go and say, well, he's teaching the truth and you know, that's good enough. He said the wrong book, but oh well. You know, I've done that myself a time or two. go to somebody's site and see them quoting something and think, well, you're quoting from the wrong book, but you're teaching the right thing. So I won't say anything about it. Really no need to. It's only splitting hairs as far as I'm concerned. But you know, I've told many people that I've talked to who have messaged me. They'll ask me some very good questions. And we'll get into a discussion, and they'll ask me, you know, who attacks you the most? Is it the atheists or the Muslims? Or is it the Hasidic or the rabbinical Jews or what? And I'll tell them none of the above. Not that I'm not attacked by some Muslims. Not that I'm not attacked by some atheists. Not that I'm not attacked by the occasional Jew. But what I'm not attacked, or what I'm attacked by the most, is by my fellow Christian brethren, so-called. In other words, they claim to believe in the same Christ I do, the same God. They claim to read the same book I do, the Bible, that is to say. But they've got a different take on it. Only where did they get their take? Well, where did you get your take? I got mine from study. Well, I've seen videos about you, Just Thoughts. I've seen videos about you saying that you don't do anything but parrot Pastor Murray. Or that you parrot this other person. You know, just because I teach the same things that the dearly departed Pastor Murray teaches does not mean that I am a Pastor Murray parrot. It does not mean that I'm a shill of his. It means I studied with him. It means I went into the Hebrew and Greek, which, if some of you who write these things will notice, I put the Greek and the Hebrew word right up there for you to see and explain it for you. Unless it's one of my audio Bible studies where I just put a picture up. But I will still tell you what the word means and how to go look it up for yourself. You know, to use the Strong's Concordance, to use the appendixes of the Companion Bible, to use the Green's Interlinear, Smith's Bible Dictionary on occasion. You know, I don't ask anybody to just believe me blindly, because I did not believe Pastor Murray blindly. There are several points that I completely disagree with Pastor Murray on. But they're small things. Very small things. Well, see there, that means you're a shill. Really? Well, then I guess, by your logic, that Matthew and Mark and Luke and John were Jesus shills, and Peter, and that Paul was a Jesus shill, and that every Christian who has ever taught the truth down through the ages of the remnant to the election nowadays here in the generation of the fig tree are all shills. Shills from one generation to the next. You know, stop and think, genius. How does information get passed one generation to another? From the elder to the younger. That's how it gets passed. So that does not make you a shill for studying with an elder person. I'll tell you quite frankly, the first few times that I listened to Pastor Murray or Bertrand Comparent, which I don't agree with a lot of what he teaches. I don't agree with a lot of what a lot of people teach. But moreover, these people are more right than they are wrong. But even so, when I first listened to Pastor Murray, who was one of the greatest teachers that I ever studied under, I said to myself, this man's crazy. I've never been taught anything like this. He's crazy. I've been to church. Been to a lot of churches. Never heard anything like this. Till the one day when Pastor Murray said, hey, prove me wrong. Don't just listen to me, prove me wrong. Go into the languages yourself. Study for yourself, which is exactly the message I pass on. Because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what the Bible tells you to do. Study to show yourself approved. Remind God of his promises. Okay, well, how can you possibly remind God of his promises if you don't know what his promises are to remind him? How can you claim the authority of Christ if you don't know what that authority is? So, you know, I revel in the fact that I'm called a Murray Shill. It's an honor to me. It's an honor to be compared to such a fine teacher.
It's even an honor to be compared sometimes to his son Dennis.
I don't care what they say. Don't bother me in the slightest. You know, the fact that they're picking on me must mean I'm doing something right. There are those that don't attack me. There are those that give me very nice compliments. And to them, I say thank you very much. But it's not me. You know, the person that I am, if any of you knew me as a person, you would probably be very disappointed at how plain I am. And, you know, some people will say, you know, you're just such a good teacher, the way you teach, the way you went through the Bible at a higher rate of speed than Pastor Murray does, or that some others do. Yeah, I did. I wanted to bring the Bible to people for a faster generation, because this generation is a very quick generation. People do not like to wait on anything. They like to get down to the heart of the matter. They like to get down to where the rubber meets the road right now. Now. They don't want to wait around. You know, it's just like going and getting fast food. You know, what are you going to do? Are you going to cook all day, or are you going to run by and grab a quick bite? Most people are going to run by and grab a quick bite. Why? They don't have time. And it's a cumbersome thing to have to cook. Now, I'm going to leave that subject be for that. Now I want to talk a little bit about hero worship. And that's what I'll probably end this on. You know, growing up as a kid, our first television was black and white. Again, I'm dating myself, I know. But we got a color television, and I began watching TV, and I watched a lot of the things that most of you probably watch who are of my age group, you know. All the old shows like Star Trek, Superman, Doctor Who, you know, Underdog, Bullwinkle and Rocky, Scooby-Doo, and any of 100 other shows over the years. Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Time Tunnel. Some of you probably never even heard of these shows because you're too young to know them. But I don't watch too much TV now. I didn't really see the political jabs in television back then, but I see them now. And of course, I still like all of these shows. You know, you grow up watching Star Trek, you like Star Trek. You grow up watching any of these shows, you like them. You know, I've got videos of them. And occasionally I'll sit down when I need to relax, and I'll watch one of these shows. Or I'll watch maybe a season of them, or 3 or 4 of them in a row. And when I was growing up, you know, the Star Wars movies came out. And, you know, I always liked the Star Wars movies. Thought they were great. And, you know, of course I idolized some of the stars in the movie as, and when I say idolized, I don't mean I worship the ground they walk on by any stretch of the imagination, but I wanted to be like them. You know, who wouldn't want to be Luke Skywalker? The kid that lives on a desert planet that's boring, and he's got all this tedious jobs to do, and all of a sudden one day, you know, not that anybody wants their family killed, but all of a sudden he comes home one day, his family's dead, and now he's off on an adventure, flying through space, learning to become a Jedi Knight, and, you know, gaining these powers and being a hero, or Han Solo, you know, the cocky pilot of the Millennium Falcon, you know, or you know, even other people in the movie. You know, if you're a girl, maybe it was Princess Leia. Or if you watch Star Trek, your hero was Captain Kirk, or maybe it was Spock, or maybe it was Mr. Sulu or Mr. Chekhov, depending on who you most identified with in the show. We're given these heroes to worship. We're given shows designed to draw us in and to want to emulate the people in them. And for some people, it's a football player that's a hero. Well, you know, football players are people who take very great risks with their body and pay for it later in life. And they make millions upon millions of dollars to do it, and many of them get to drinking and get into drug habits and gambling and all kinds of things. Others live quietly and within their means and, you know, live the rest of their lives off the money they made during their career. But does that make them a hero? No. The man that gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning and hops on a transport and goes to Afghanistan, scared to death for his life, never knowing whether he'll see his wife or children or mother and dad again, and hops off that plane in the dark and hits the ground and crawls along the ground and sets up a base and goes into towns, taking his life into his hands that a suicide bomber could kill him, or that he could hit a landmine, or that he could be shot by a sniper, or walk past a tank that was buried in the dirt and have his body blown in half. That's a hero. Not a football player. Not a baseball player. Not the people that starred in the movies. They're not heroes. They're highly paid actors, and most of them are liberals who support the progressive cause, who support things that are ungodly. They're not heroes. So people need to get their priorities in order as to what a hero is. And I've been guilty of it myself. I'm not going to call anyone else down and say that I've not done it. You know, when I was young, I wanted to be Captain Kirk. I had models of the Enterprise, and I sat there and daydreamed about missions into space, and I had all the little phaser toys and the communicator, and, you know, I did those kind of things. Not really realizing that in the reality of things, I just thought it was entertainment, when really it was kind of a form of indoctrination. You know, the people that wrote things like Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, and all the great novels, H.G. Wells, are people that are literary geniuses, of course. Are they heroes, though? No. And also, they gave us a non-reality. See, that's the bad side of Star Trek and all the shows that you loved. Is that, or when you go see a movie, everybody wants to be James Bond, or everybody wants to be whoever the hero is in whatever movie. You know, I don't care if it's The Bourne Identity or The Matrix or whatever movie that you really, really got off on and loved, that you wanted to be that hero, that you sat around and daydreamed to being that person. And we all do it. We're all guilty of it. But what we have been given is role models. And whether they're good role models or not is debatable. Everybody wants to be James Bond because he never fails in a mission, and he always wins. But does that happen in real life? Hell no, it doesn't happen. The greatest heroes in the world that go out and fight on the battlefields, or whether they're in a police car or in a fire truck, take their life into their hands, and they're mortal, and they can be killed. They don't have a movie script that says James Bond narrowly misses being chopped in half by a pendulum, or a laser is stopped from cutting him in half because he says something that interests the one who's about to kill him. We're given role models. And of course we want to be like them. Why? Because they don't fail. We know that they're going to be okay at the end of the movie. And when they're not okay, such as in, let's say, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when Spock died, you know, I remember the night I went and saw that movie. I was teary-eyed about that. But there were people in the movie theater when we left. I mean, there were women that were just crying their eyes out because Spock had died. And I got to thinking about it myself, and I thought how silly I was for letting that get to me. You know, it was because of the story, and the story touched me, and Spock had been one of my heroes. But then I realized, you know what? This is Leonard Nimoy. He's a millionaire, and more than likely they're going to find a way to bring him back in the next movie, which subsequently they did. And so Spock lived on. And Spock outlived the rest of his crew, you know? But we're given all of these models. And what happens, though, after we leave the theater? After we leave all that excitement, all that drama, all of that action? Well, then we've got to return to our boring, everyday lives. We've got to come back to reality. We've got to come down off that high. And then we don't feel so big anymore. And when I say big, I don't mean like big-headed. I mean, we look at our lives of working the everyday grind and how we're just plain people, simple people, doing a job for minimum wage or, if we're lucky, more. And then we start thinking about our heroes from the movies, and we wish we could be them. And all too often, we wish we could be them so bad. To tell you the truth, there have been people who have actually gone out, and I think this is why cosplay is such a popular thing in sci-fi conventions, which I enjoy going to sci-fi conventions. And yes, I still enjoy sci-fi to this very day. But I am able to make the transition between understanding what is real and what is not real. I'm able to see the dark messages that are hidden within shows like Star Trek and Doctor Who and all the big famous shows now. And these are my favorite shows that I'm talking about here, you know? They're the kinds of shows that I love to watch. But when they're over, or the season ends, then what? Well, then you watch repeats. But why do you watch the repeats? Because you enjoyed it. It was like reading a good book. And that's another form of it, sitting down and reading a good book. People will read a book that excites them, or a romance novel, or whatever turns them on. But then what happens when they get to the last page? Well, then they've got to return to their normal, boring, everyday life and go back to work and hate every minute of it and come home and watch whatever's on the TV and oftentimes be depressed and feel like they've lived a small life because they've been duped by the illusion of Hollywood. They've been duped by bigger-than-life characters. And maybe not purposely duped. I tend to lean kind of two ways on that. I think there is an agenda even behind that, but we're all given these heroes to worship. And I really shouldn't say worship because I don't worship, but a lot of people do. I mean, I know roadies that will follow rock groups around all over the country, and they don't work, but somehow they manage to eat. They follow these rock groups around all over the country and watch them every night play the same songs. Don't bother them a bit. Responsibility? Who needs it? I can be out on the road, dude. I can be watching my favorite band every night. I can get my pictures taken with them. I can get my autograph taken with them. And in years to come, I'll show everybody that, hey, I was there with this person. You know, I was there with Gene Simmons or with Paul Stanley. Or I was there with, Ozzy Osbourne. You know, like I'm on a first name basis with them. When they probably couldn't pick you out of a crowd. You know, that's one reason, quite frankly, I don't get onto groups that have Shepherd's Chapel associated with them or blogs. Because some of the people in there act like, you know, I was on a personal first name basis with Pastor Murray before he passed on. I went to every Passover and every fall fellowship. And me and Arnie were friends. Well, my goodness me, touch you. Boy, aren't you holy. You know, I bet you Pastor Murray would roll over in his grave if he thought you were using his reputation for that. You know, as great a man as Pastor Murray was, as great a teacher as he was still a human being. And, you know, when Pastor Murray's wife died, he knew where she was, yet the man was human. And I know any of you that watched during those years, as I did, when his wife passed on, that Pastor Murray lost a lot of weight, and he got very frail for a number of months. And he was a little less strong in his voice when he talked, because he was hurting. And then shortly before his own passing back to our Father, his son David died. And he lost the weight again, and he became frail again, only this time he never was able to pull out of the tailspin. Now, what does that mean? It means that Pastor Murray was a human being, just like you and me. He was a chosen vessel, chosen by God to do what he did. And people wrote me and actually said, what are we going to do now? Moses has died. And I was like, what? Yeah, Pastor Murray, Moses. And, you know, Pastor Murray probably would have decked them had he heard them say something like that. So there's all kinds of hero worship out there. There's all kinds of things in the world. You got positive role models, you've got good role models, and you've got bad role models. You've got people that you want to be like and you want to emulate. But they're not heroes. They're highly paid actors. Or they're highly paid football players, or highly paid baseball players, or basketball players, or hockey players that make millions for a couple of hours on the field or on the ice or whatever. They make millions of dollars. What makes them a hero? Yet the soldier that goes off and fights a war for his country, or fights against terrorism, whether it be real terrorism or false flag terrorism, the soldier doesn't know that. He's going and obeying orders and doing what he's supposed to do. Those are the heroes. And what about the police officers that have to go out onto the streets and take their lives into their hands? And when they arrest someone, 7 times out of 10, the person gets out early, or there's some kind of a technicality that some sorry lawyer got him off on, who doesn't care about justice or the law, which I realize they have to be that way in certain cases. But even so, justice is thwarted. And knowing police officers myself, I've had many of them tell me that their hands are tied in a lot of cases where they can't do a thing. And I'm not going to mention a case that's ongoing right now, but a person was murdered. I won't mention any names, let me say that. A person was murdered recently that I know. I know his family anyway. And it seems that nothing's being done about it. In other words, they have leads that the police officers don't seem to be following up on. They have suspects that have posted things or said things that they're not hauling off to jail and getting the answers out of. And you've got to wonder why that is. It's because the whole world is turning upside down. Bitter is being given for sweet, and darkness is being given for light. And all of it an agenda. And it's being confused with disinformation and misinformation by the conspiracy theorists. Now, that is not to say that some of the conspiracies aren't true. They very well may be true. And some of them probably are true. But how can you know? How can you tell? Because it's on YouTube? Does that make it real? Because it's on a blog? We can't know everything. We can't know the facts because we aren't there to see them. So we need to withhold judgment and take a step back from this and think about this stuff. And we need to think about our priorities in life and what we're allowing our children to watch and play video games of. And what we call a hero. Anyway, like I said, I decided just to do this tonight as a commentary rather than a Bible study. Usually I do some sort of Bible study in this, but I guess I just wanted to get this off my chest. I think a lot of you see it anyway without me telling you, but I think it needs to be said every now and again, which is why I get on here and do these current events or these commentaries or whatever I'm doing, whether I'm teaching or whether I'm just venting off steam. I think it's important that someone say it and speak it. So there you have it. I've said it, I've spoken it, and I'm not ashamed that I spoke it. I'm a little bit ashamed of the language that I used tonight. I ask your forgiveness. But every now and then you get to the point where the anger builds up inside of you, just as it did with the apostles, just as it did with the prophets, who all suffered, who were all persecuted, but they were men too. You know, they were no different than me or you, save that some of them got to actually speak to God. But I think one reason that we in this generation don't get to speak to God is because we are expected to walk by faith and not by sight. You know, that is the, I don't want to say the burden, but it's part of the load the election have to carry. We have to walk by faith and not by sight. So, have I ever seen a bona fide miracle? Well, I could say yes and I could say no. In other words, I have seen someone come back from the brink of death who was written off the page. But have I ever seen someone really be healed? No. As far as, well, let me qualify that. Have I ever seen an instant healing? Have I ever seen someone walk in with a real broken leg, which I knew was broken, and had a pastor slap them on the forehead, knock them to the ground, and say, get up and start dancing? And they were healed? No. Have I ever seen someone with spina bifida or any disease, muscular dystrophy, go in to some pastor and have him spit on them or blow on them or slap them on the forehead and tell them to be healed and have it happen? No. You know why? Because all that is a bunch of fake crap. And if you think not, then go to one of these shows and ask the good healer to come outside of his little sawdust tent where he takes in all the money and go to all the hospitals around the area and see if he can cure even one person at the hospital. And I'll tell you this, if he does, it will be because he prearranged it and sent someone ahead of him. You know, Christ, our Lord and Savior himself, only healed but few people. He didn't heal everyone that came to him. If they came to him in faith, he did. But there were plenty of people that Christ walked right by that he could have healed, and he didn't. So you're going to tell me that some pastor today's got more power than Christ and can cure anybody and everybody that comes into his sawdust tent or that goes to his church? Well, I'm going to tell you what, if he thinks so or if you think so, then you're full of something that doesn't smell very good. But they keep packing them in there and filling them up and making themselves rich. You know, they live in mansions and they have chauffeur-driven limousines. They've got their 40-acre compound and their swimming pools and their tennis courts. You know, you want to talk about the greedy of America? Look at some of your big pastors of your big churches. I don't care how nice a person they are and how sweet a words they say. Look at their home life. Look at their net worth. And look what they actually do. Oh, sure, some of them will spend money on charity. They've got to maintain the image. But look where the money really goes. Look at your house compared to their house. You know, I would rather go into a little church that could hold maybe 30 or 40 people and hear the truth than to go into a big, giant coliseum, glass-lined, lighted from every corner, soundstage with gold and silver and tassels and all the bells and whistles and hear the truth than to go into that church. In other words, I'd rather go to the small church and hear the truth than the big church and hear nothing. Because that's basically what they teach. They'll give you a psychology lesson 101 is what they'll give you. Anybody can do that. Anybody can tell you right from wrong. Even a criminal can tell you right from wrong. They may not practice it, but they can tell you. So again, we need to re-examine some of the things that we believe, that we do, that we watch, that we allow our children to watch, and the people that we call heroes, and the people that we pay money. Because if it comes down to reality, who should be paid the most money? The person that protects the country or the football player? The police officer that takes his life into his hands or the hockey player? The fat cat politician that takes your money and does what he wants with it? Or the war veteran or those on Social Security? You know, it's all a matter of priorities. It's all a matter of common sense. But there is none, which is what half the Bible tells you. At any rate, I think that's where I'm going to end for now. I'm done venting. So, as always, my beautiful brothers and sisters in Christ, I pray for you. And I do pray for you, believe it or not. I don't know many of your faces. I've never met you. Some of you have written me, some of you have not. And even those of you who have written me that listen to these things, whether you love me or you hate me, I pray for you. I pray for those that come against me just as much as I pray for those that come and say nice words to me. Now, I don't wish them Godspeed, the ones that come against me, but I pray for them that maybe a little bit of light will enter into their eyes and that they might be able to see. Because I'm always hopeful of that chance. Always hopeful that a little seed planted might have an effect. Might begin to grow. Might sprout. And I don't pray in vain. And I'm not telling you that I pray for you to get you to feel any certain way about me. I'm just telling you the facts. I pray for many things. I pray when I'm asked to pray for people. I anoint when I'm asked to anoint. And I pray for those who don't ask me. If I see something going on, a wreck or something, I will pray, which is what we should all do, because that's what Christians do. We're compassionate towards others. We don't have to know them. At any rate, get into your Father's Word. Study. Get into the languages the best you can. And do the best you can to please our Father by study and by praying to our Father and asking for guidance and wisdom and understanding of His Word. Because He is the only one able to give it. I can't give it, and I can't take credit for any of the teaching I've done. The only thing I did was to sit down and use this mouth which God gave me to orate the knowledge that He gave me. But as far as me as being a human being, I'm a sinner. I'm not perfect. Nor do I claim to be. Only Christ was perfect. And none of you out there listening to me are perfect. We're all sinners. That's why we have our intercessor, why we pray non-ceasingly, and why we have to ask repentance often. Because we are subject to the world as long as we dwell in this flesh. So think about these things and pray for our brothers that walk in darkness, that they may see the light. And pray to our Heavenly Father when you study His Word. Thank you for listening to this commentary. May God bless you. This has been Just Thoughts.